right, let's now move on to section 8, Conclavist Antipopes refuted. What is a conclavist antipope? A conclavist is someone who believes that illegitimate authorities, usually laymen, can elect a pope in their view. Can elect a pope since, in their view, we have no pope currently. The quote-unquote popes, so-called elected in these invalid ways, are conclavist antipopes. David Bowden. Let's first talk about David Bowden. David Bowden was a schismatic antipope who at one point did indeed believe that Giuseppe Siri was Pope Gregory XVII, but later denied that he ever did. He was dismissed from the so-called SSPX for unknown reasons and spent a long time unemployed and trying to find a priest to ordain him, but none would. You can read a bit about his backstory and proof that he at one point accepted the true exiled papacy at this link right here, okay? And if you go to todayscatholicworld.com, they have like an index of posts where you can see like all the posts they made on that website. Here are excerpts from a few important letters. So document 3, from David Bowden to Father Colt Van Tran, dated November 2nd, 1988. It says, "Dear Father, first I would like to thank you for your kind hospitality during my recent visit. The retreat was truly beneficial." TCW puts a note here, letter from Bowden to Father Colt, written after he has met with Father Colt in Port Arthur, Texas. Again, Bowden has claimed for more than 15 years that no specific answer or info was given to him by Father Colt regarding whether, quote-unquote, Siri was the Pope. Continuing the letter here. Father Dunphy is the beginning of most of the traditionalist chapels in the United States, Port Arthur and Houston being notable exceptions. He traveled coast to coast and border to border from about 1970 to June of 1973. His only mission was to bring the sacraments to the faithful who asked him and to preach sanctity. He held several days of recollection for us in Oklahoma City. I can still remember parts of his sermons because they were so good. Anyone who had met him probably will remember him. He is so different from the society priests and the majority of traditionalist priests. In June of 1973, his superiors in the La Salette Fathers ordered him to cease his travels, and he obeyed their directive. He never has said the Novus Ordo Missae of Paul VI. He was a seminary professor. When he ceased his travels, I could not understand. However, with the confusion of today, for many, he has been a voice of counsel and consolation in these troubled times. He hears confessions of all who come to him, says mass for a small convent of nuns near him, and counsels any who requested of him. He truly worked for the faith, giving us some preparation for the traditionalist storm which would hit us in a few years. I see here a good man who God is preparing for the church when Cardinal Siri assumes the papacy. I strongly recommend having a retreat with him, even if you must go to St. Louis. In fact, since you both work only for Jesus, you have much in common already. When I called my parents midweek last week, as they had requested, they asked me to describe you. I said the best way to describe you is to imagine Father Dunphy with a Vietnamese accent. That is the only difference I see in the two of you. You both work for Christ fully. I recommend that you call him, as he is slow to answer letters, and in my case, has not answered letters because he only answers if there is some help he can give due to the volume of work he has. Therefore, please call him. TCW writes here, says content, Bowden mentions well-known priest Father Dunphy would be of help when Cardinal Siri assumes the papacy. Also, Bowden shows his high opinion of the holy priest Father Coate, which is consistently seen throughout all of his letters. And as I mentioned previously, Coate Tran has, since this time and from when last I heard of him, become a heretic. Okay, that should not be a cause for scandal, because even Judas was one of the Lord's apostles, and King Solomon became an idolater even after God appeared to him. So just because God appears to somebody or blesses them tremendously at a certain point in time does not mean they will persevere. This is it's continuing, I think. This skipped part of the letter and went to this part. Continuing this letter from Bowden, it says, I believe Siri is Pope. I shall endeavor to bring more evidence to bear in this manner so that others might believe as well. However, I am not discussing this with many, only those who have asked me what I think on Siri, and then only if they ask again and with great reserve. I shall not mention your visit to Siri. Okay? Please pray for me and be assured of my prayers. I shall send some more books in the next couple of days. I pray they will be of assistance to you. Please pray that I may become a fool for Christ. Yours in Christ the King, David Bowden. Now from TCW here, it says, from evidence gathered from Bowden's Port Arthur trip in October, Bowden writes Father Coate that he believes that Siri is Pope. Note, Father Coate had also in confidence told about his secret meetings with the living at that time hostage Pope Gregory XVII to Bowden, who states, I shall not mention your visit with Siri. This alone exposes David Bowden's narration of events as entirely false. Document 4, from David Bowden to Father Coate, November 11th, 1988. It says, Dear Father, since returning home, I have been meditating on what, and it's cut off. It says November 11th, 1988. 9 days later, another letter from Bowden to Father Coate. And then another snippet here. It reads, at one time I agreed, but with the knowledge that Siri is Pope, which I fully believe. I know that he will need priests when he takes possession of Peter's throne visibly and officially. My life has prepared me for this. My life has prepared me for this, I believe, and I want to do everything in my power to prepare myself for this task. TCW writes, Bowden reaffirms his conviction to Father Coate that Siri is Pope and brings up ordinations. And the ending, may God bless and guide us. Yours in Christ the King, David Bowden. TCW says Bowden's signature to this letter. So let me see. The previous one is from November 2nd. All right, hold on. November 2nd. That was the first one, right? Yeah. November 2nd is the first one. Then November 11th. Okay. All right. Antipope Michael I. Still unordained, Bowden, his parents, and 3 other laymen held an invalid conclave at his family's thrift store in Bellevue, Kansas on July 16th, 1990. Bowden was quote-unquote elected and took the name Michael I. One of the laymen who quote-unquote elected Antipope Michael was Teresa Stanfield Benz, the author of BetrayedCatholics.com. However, Benz has subsequently rejected Antipope Michael and said she was misled. Apparently, Bowden invited tons of independent so-called bishops and sedevacantists to the false conclave, but none attended. I just want to note that I often say so-called bishop and so-called priest because I don't know whether these people's orders are valid or not. So I just kind of, say so-called oftentimes. So let's see here. This is a newspaper. It's the Kansas State Collegian from Thursday, July 19th, 1990. And if you look here, this part right here, talking about, it says group elects area man Pope. And this is the, zoomed in version of it. So we're going to read what this newspaper reported about this false election, right? It says, Group elects area man Pope. Catholic claims to be true Christ vicar by the Associated Press. St. Mary's. A 30-year-old layman who says he is now the only true vicar of Christ on earth has been elected quote-unquote Pope by 6 of his supporters. And I don't know whether their math is off or my math is off, because my information here says Bowden, his parents, and 3 other laymen, which is 6 people. But Bowden being the one that's falsely elected would not be one of his own supporters, right? So it'd be like Bowden and 5 of his supporters. You understand? So yeah, but it's not a big deal. The fact is a bunch of laymen got together and did a bunch of nonsense and claimed that they have a pope. So St. Mary's, a 30-year-old layman who says he is now the only true vicar of Christ on earth, has been elected quote-unquote Pope by 6 of his supporters. David Bowden said his followers now refer to him as Pope Michael I. He was elected Monday during a gathering in his father's thrift store. For Bowden, his family, and Teresa Benz, a supporter who co-authored a book on the Catholic Church with Bowden, the facts are clear. We claim to be the one true church, outside of which no one can be saved. And I just find that kind of funny because it's so absurd, right? A bunch of random laymen got together and claimed to elect a pope, and this person is proudly saying, now Benz is proudly saying, we claim to be the one true church. I'm like, bro, like, you have no authority, no business trying to elect a pope. You're not the one true church, okay? So let's read that part again. We claim to be the one true church, outside of which no one can be saved, Benz said. And as I mentioned before as well, I have a sense of humor. So some people may be like, oh, this is so serious, but I laugh at a bunch of stuff. So yeah, I just find that kind of funny that, she's like, we claim to be the one true church. And they have just this random antipope that no one cares about, right? Anyways, let's continue. We claim to be the one true church, outside of which no one can be saved, Ben said. She said the present Pope, John Paul II, is an antipope elected by heretics. And ironically, of course, she herself, at this point, just falsely elected an antipope as well, right? During Monday's ceremony, which Bowden's parents attended, he dressed in symbols of the Pope's authority. He said he wanted to be a priest since he was a child, but he saw serious errors in church doctrine and practice. So he affiliated with splinter groups like the St. Pius X Society and the excommunicated Swiss Archbishop Lefebvre. The Society of St. Pius X follows traditional Catholic practices and does not adhere to many of the changes in the Church since Vatican II. The Society opposes ecumenism. I always mess up that word. The Society opposes ecumenism, a movement seeking to achieve worldwide unity among religions through greater cooperation and improved understanding. The words are so small, I'm trying to read this. But even in that group, Bowden found something wrong. He attended Lefebvre's seminary in Europe for 3 months before being transferred to a St. Pius X seminary in Michigan, where he was dismissed for unexplained reasons a year later. Here's a quote from Bowden's mother. It says, "I'm just thrilled to death. Since Pope Pius X, Since Pope Pius XII died, we haven't had a true pope. Now we do," says Ciara Bowden, mother of quote-unquote pope. When his family moved to St. Mary's so his brother could attend St. Mary's Academy and College, a private Catholic boarding and day school, Bowden studied there to enter the Brotherhood. He resigned, however, protesting what he said were improper Catholic practices at the school. His subsequent research on a book with Benz gave him the doctrinal support to demand the election of a new pope, he said. The book was privately published earlier this year. The Pope, as the supreme authority, can determine the direction of all church teachings, he said. It is our duty to see that the gospel is preached pure and undefiled throughout the world, Bowden said. I am just thrilled to death, said Bowden's mother Ciara, who described herself as a devout traditional Catholic who prides herself on her knowledge of church history. Since Pope Pius XII died, we haven't had a true pope. Now we do. Bowden's belief that he is Pope of the Catholic Church is an isolated viewpoint and does not reflect the beliefs or teachings of Catholic parishes in the area, local observers said. Bowden and his followers are an extreme example of a splintering from the traditional Catholic faith, said Father John Erickson, former priest of the Immaculate Conception Church at St. Mary's and now with the Sacred Heart Parish in Topeka. Erickson said he urges his parishioners to be tolerant of those who hold different beliefs, but that does not mean they have to accept those beliefs. I feel sorry for them, the Bowdens, he said. It's pathetic. They're good, sincere people, and I know it would anger them to hear this, but I pity them. It's hard to be different. There's still terrible prejudice in the world. Antipope Michael II. So Bowden was finally, quote unquote, ordained, whether validly or not, I have no idea, in 2011, and he died on August 2nd, 2022, still claiming to be, quote unquote, Pope Michael I. On July 23rd, 2023, a Filipino man named Rogelio Martinez was, quote unquote, elected Antipope Michael II. Obviously, the entire, so-called Pope Michael sect is completely null, void, and worthless. Why? A group of random laymen cannot elect the Pope. And of course, we already have a true Pope. They just don't know about the true Pope. Or they might know about him and reject him. Whatever the case is. So, Antipope Pius XIII. There have been other conclavist antipopes like Lucian Pulvermacher, pictured to the right, who after a group of laymen, quote unquote, elected him in October 1998, claimed to be so-called Pope Pius XIII. Antipope Jacobus I. Finally, there is an antipope on YouTube who goes by the name Jacobus I. I emailed this antipope to find out what his claims are to the papacy, but he refused to answer since I did not have the quote-unquote proper reverence or something like that. There seem to be countless other conclavist antipopes, showing that the devil is really working overtime to fill the world with false so-called popes who lead people into schism and hell and keep them away from Pope Gregory XVIII and the true papacy.